The sun was setting over Pine Ridge, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Captain Laura Hayes sat in her car at a red light, tapping her fingers lightly on the steering wheel. She had been looking forward to this visit home for weeks. After months of grueling work at Fort Liberty, the chance to relax in her hometown felt like a gift. But as the light turned green and she drove forward, something unusual caught her eye. A commotion near the small convenience store on the corner. A man wearing a dark hoodie and a mask over his face burst out of the shop, clutching a purse tightly, in one hand. Behind him, an older woman stood frozen, her face pale with shock. Her mouth opened as if to scream, but no sound came out. The robber glanced around nervously before sprinting down the sidewalk, shoving aside anyone who got too close. Laura's heart raced. Without thinking twice, she pulled her car to the curb, switched off the engine, and stepped out. She didn't hesitate. Her training kicked in immediately. This wasn't just some random act of crime. Someone needed help, and she couldn't stand by and do nothing. She took off running after the man, her boots pounding against the pavement. The hooded figure darted into an alleyway, weaving between trash bins and crates. Laura followed closely, her breaths coming fast but steady. Years of physical conditioning in the military gave her an edge. She could feel the distance closing between them. "Stop right there," she shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. "Drop the purse." But the man ignored her, moving faster now. He leaped over a fallen crate and disappeared around a corner. Laura pushed herself harder, ignoring the burning sensation in her legs. She rounded the corner and saw him heading toward an abandoned industrial area. The buildings here were old and crumbling, their windows boarded up or shattered. It was the perfect place for someone to hide or escape. As she chased him deeper into the maze of warehouses, Laura noticed 2 police cars speeding down the street ahead. Relief washed over her briefly. Backup was finally arriving. Maybe these officers would cut off the thief's escape route. But as the vehicles screeched to a halt, blocking the narrow road, Laura realized something was wrong. 2 men stepped out of the cars, both wearing uniforms. One was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and a stern expression. His name tag read Dawson. The other was shorter, with a buzz cut and a sour look on his face. His badge identified him as Hicks. They weren't scanning the area for the fleeing suspect. They were staring directly at Laura. "Freeze!" Dawson barked, raising his hand toward her. Hicks moved to block her path, his hand resting casually on the grip of his holstered gun. Laura skidded to a stop, confusion written all over her face. "I'm chasing a robber," she said quickly, pointing in the direction the man had gone. "He's armed and dangerous. He just stole a purse from a woman outside the store back there." Dawson crossed his arms, his lips curling into a smirk. "You're not the one giving orders here, lady. Let us handle it." Laura frowned. "There's no time to waste. He's getting away." Hicks snorted, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure, some random civilian thinks she can play cop. Real original." Laura clenched her fists, frustration bubbling inside her. These men clearly didn't understand the urgency of the situation. Every second they wasted arguing meant the thief slipped farther away. "I'm not a civilian," she snapped. "I'm Captain Laura Hayes, U.S. Army. Now step aside so I can catch that guy." Her words seemed to have the opposite effect. Dawson's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. "Army, huh? Big shot soldier thinks she knows better than local. Law enforcement?" "That's not what I'm saying," Laura replied, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm trying to help. That man is dangerous and he's getting away while we stand here talking." Hicks exchanged a glance with Dawson, then shrugged. Maybe she's right. Or maybe she's just looking for attention. Laura groaned inwardly. Arguing with these men was wasting precious time. She glanced past them, searching for any sign of the thief. If she could just get around them, she might still be able to catch him. Taking a deep breath, she tried to step forward, only to find Dawson stepping into her path. "Where do you think you're going?" he growled, grabbing her arm roughly. Laura instinctively pulled away, her temper flaring. "Let go of me. You're making a mistake." Dawson tightened his grip, yanking her closer. "No, you're the one making a mistake. Resisting arrest isn't going to look good for you." "I'm not resisting anything," Laura shot back, struggling to free herself. "I'm trying to stop a criminal." Hicks stepped closer, his hand hovering near his holster. "Enough of this nonsense. You're coming with us." Laura couldn't believe what was happening. These officers weren't listening to reason. They weren't even interested in catching the real culprit. They were focused solely on controlling her. Anger surged through her veins, but she forced herself to take a step back, holding up her hands in surrender. Fine. Do your job. But don't blame me when that thief gets away, Dawson sneered. Oh, we'll blame whoever we want. Now shut up and cooperate. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Laura stared at the two men, her mind racing. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to make them see how ridiculous this was. But she knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she stood silently, her chest heaving as she tried to calm herself. Then suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed nearby. Laura's eyes darted toward the noise. Could it be the thief? Was he doubling back? Before she could react, Dawson shoved her again, harder this time. She stumbled backward, losing her balance. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed awkwardly on the ground. Careful, Dawson, Hicks muttered, though there was no real concern in his voice. Don't want to damage the hero too much. Laura gritted her teeth, pushing herself back to her feet. Her pride stung almost as much as her ankle. These men were impossible. They refused to listen, refused to act, and now they were actively preventing her from doing her part. As she stood there, glaring at them, she realized something unsettling. This wasn't just about catching a thief anymore. Something darker was at play here. And as the seconds ticked by, the chances of finding the real criminal grew slimmer and slimmer. Laura stood there, her ankle throbbing and her frustration boiling over. She couldn't believe what was happening. The two officers, Dawson and Hicks, were more focused on stopping her than catching the thief who had just committed a crime. It didn't make sense. They were supposed to protect people, not stand in the way of justice. She tried one last time to reason with them. Look, she said firmly, keeping her voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside her. There's a man running loose right now. He stole from an innocent person and he could hurt someone else if we don't catch him. Why are you wasting time arguing with me? Dawson rolled his eyes, clearly unimpressed. We're not wasting time. You're the one causing trouble here. Civilians like you shouldn't interfere with police work. I'm not a civilian, Laura snapped, her patience wearing thin. I told you I'm Captain Laura Hayes, U.S. Army. I've been trained for situations like this. If you just let me go, I could help you catch him. Hicks chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, sure. A soldier playing hero in our town. Real original story, lady. Laura clenched her fists, trying hard not to lose her temper. These men weren't listening. They didn't care about facts or logic. They only cared about asserting their authority. And it was infuriating. Fine, she said finally, taking a step back. If you won't listen, then tell me what you plan to do. Are you going after the thief or are you just going to stand here all day? Dawson smirked, crossing his arms. We'll handle it our way. You stay out of this. Their way? Laura thought bitterly. Their way seemed to involve doing nothing except harassing her. She glanced past them, hoping to spot any sign of movement that might reveal where the thief had gone. But the narrow street was empty, the shadows growing longer as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Her mind raced. She needed to act quickly. Every second they wasted meant the thief got farther away. Without warning, Laura made a split-second decision. She darted to the side, trying to slip past Dawson and Hicks. If she could just get around them, she could continue the chase herself. But Dawson reacted instantly. He grabbed her arm again, yanking her back roughly. Where do you think you're going? He barked, his grip tightening painfully. Laura winced but refused to back down. Let go of me. I'm trying to stop a criminal. You're resisting arrest, Dawson growled, twisting her arm behind her back. That's enough out of you. Resisting arrest? Laura's heart sank. This was absurd. She wasn't resisting anything, she was trying to help. But these men weren't interested in hearing her side of the story. To them, she was just another obstacle to be dealt with. Hicks stepped closer, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun. Enough messing around, let's cuff her. Laura's stomach churned. This was spiraling out of control. She tried, to pull away again, but Dawson's hold was too strong. Her voice rose in desperation. "You're making a huge mistake. That thief is still out there. Don't you understand?" Neither officer responded. Instead, Hicks pulled out a pair of handcuffs and moved to assist Dawson. Laura struggled harder, twisting and turning in an effort to break free, but it was no use. Between the two of them, they managed to force her arms behind her back and snap the cuffs into place. The cold metal dug into her wrists as Dawson pushed her against the hood of one of the patrol cars. Laura stared at the ground, her mind racing. How had this happened? One moment she was chasing a thief, and the next she was being treated like a criminal herself. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. "You're letting him get away." Dawson leaned in close, his face inches from hers. "Shut your mouth," he spat. "You brought this on yourself." Laura bit back a retort, knowing it wouldn't help. These men weren't reasonable. They were determined to prove they were in charge, even if it meant ignoring the real threat. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Losing her temper wouldn't solve anything. As Hicks radioed for backup, Dawson kept a firm grip on her shoulder, ensuring she couldn't move. Laura scanned the area, searching for any clue that might lead her to the thief. But the streets remained eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Minutes passed, and Laura's frustration grew. The thief had likely escaped by now, disappearing into the maze of warehouses or slipping out of town entirely. All because these officers had chosen to focus on her instead of doing their jobs. Finally, Hicks lowered his radio and turned to Dawson. "Backup's on the way. What do we do with her?" Dawson shrugged. "Stick her in the car for now. We'll sort it out later." Before Laura could protest, Hicks grabbed her arm and shoved her toward the open door of the patrol car. She stumbled, slightly wincing as pain shot through her ankle again. The interior of the car smelled faintly of leather and stale coffee, and the seat felt uncomfortably warm against her skin. As the door slammed shut behind her, Laura leaned back, closing her eyes. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had acted out of instinct, driven by a desire to help, but instead of being thanked, she was being punished. Outside, Dawson and Hicks talked quietly, occasionally glancing in her direction. Laura strained to hear their conversation, but their voices were too low to make out. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't good news for her. Time seemed to crawl by. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of orange and purple. Streetlights flickered on, illuminating the empty streets. Laura watched silently, her thoughts swirling. She wondered if anyone had called her family yet, or if the officers planned to keep her locked up until reinforcements arrived. Just as she began to consider shouting for help, a third police car pulled up. A middle-aged officer stepped out, his expression unreadable. He approached Dawson and Hicks, nodding briefly before turning his attention to the patrol car where Laura sat. Laura met his gaze, hoping to see some sign of understanding or compassion. But his eyes were cold, devoid of emotion. Whatever happened next, she realized, depended entirely on him. The new officer motioned for Dawson to open the door. Reluctantly, Dawson complied, stepping aside as the older man leaned in to speak to Laura. "Captain Hayes," he said flatly, his tone neutral, "I hear you've caused quite a scene today." Laura swallowed hard, choosing her words carefully. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I was chasing a thief, a real criminal. Those two," she nodded toward Dawson and Hicks, "stopped me instead of helping." The officer studied her for a moment, his expression unchanged. Then he straightened and turned to address Dawson and Hicks. "Get her out of the car. Let's take her downtown for questioning." Laura's heart sank. Questioning? For what? She hadn't done anything wrong. Yet here she was, being treated like a suspect instead of a victim of circumstance. As Hicks unlocked the cuffs and pulled her out of the car, Laura caught sight of something in the distance, a figure darting between buildings, barely visible in the fading light. Could it be the thief? She opened her mouth to point it out, but Hicks tightened his grip on her arm, silencing her before she could speak. "Don't even think about it," he warned, his voice low and menacing. Laura closed her mouth, her hope fading. The thief was getting away, and there was nothing she could do about it, not while these men held her captive. As they led her toward the waiting patrol car, Laura glanced back one last time, searching for any sign of movement. The figure was gone, vanished into the shadows. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The thief had escaped, and it was all because of the officer's incompetence and prejudice. The ride to the police station was silent and tense. Laura sat in the back seat of the patrol car, her hands still cuffed behind her back. She stared out the window, watching as the familiar streets of Pine Ridge blurred past. The town she had grown up in now felt foreign, almost hostile. Her mind raced with questions. Why were these officers so determined to treat her like a criminal? Was it because she was a woman? Or was it something else, something deeper? Dawson drove while Hicks sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at her through the rearview mirror. Neither of them spoke, but their silence was heavy with accusation. Laura wanted to say something, to defend herself or explain her actions, but she knew it wouldn't matter. These men weren't interested in hearing her side of the story. They had already made up their minds about her. When they arrived at the station, Laura was led inside, her footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. The building was dimly lit with fluorescent lights flickering overhead. A few officers sat at desks, typing on computers or talking quietly into phones. No one paid much attention to her as she was guided down a narrow hallway and into a small interrogation room. The room was cold and sterile, with a single metal table and 2 chairs. Laura was instructed to sit, and Hicks secured her cuffs to the table before leaving the room. She sat there alone, her heart pounding in her chest. The cuffs dug into her wrists and her ankle throbbed painfully from where she'd landed awkwardly earlier. But physical pain was nothing compared to the frustration and anger boiling inside her. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Laura tried to stay calm, focusing on her breathing. She reminded herself that this was just a misunderstanding, that eventually someone would listen to reason. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about logic or facts. It was about something far more personal. Finally, the door opened and Officer Dawson entered, followed by the older officer who had arrived at the scene earlier. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Grant, his tone clipped and professional. He carried a folder in one hand and placed it on the table before sitting across from Laura. "Captain Hayes," he began, opening the folder. "Let's start from the beginning. Can you tell me exactly what happened tonight?" Laura nodded, relieved to finally have a chance to explain herself. "I was driving through town when I saw a man rob a woman outside a convenience store. I got out of my car and chased him. When I caught up to him near the warehouses, Officers Dawson and Hicks stopped me. They wouldn't let me continue pursuing the thief even though I told them what was happening." Grant listened silently, jotting notes in the folder. When she finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "And why? Did you feel it was your responsibility to chase this man?" "I'm trained for situations like this," Laura replied firmly. "As a U.S. Army officer, I've been taught how to handle threats and protect civilians. I wasn't trying to interfere, I was trying to help." Grant raised an eyebrow. "Help? By ignoring local law enforcement and taking matters into your own hands?" "That's not what happened," Laura exclaimed, her voice rising slightly. "I wasn't ignoring anyone. I was chasing a criminal who was getting away. When I encountered Officers Dawson and Hicks, I explained everything clearly. They chose not to act." Grant's expression didn't change. "According to their report, you resisted arrest and became aggressive when they attempted to restrain you." Laura stared at him, disbelief washing over her. "That's not true. I tried to reason with them, but they refused to listen. I only struggled because they were preventing me from stopping the thief." Grant sighed, closing the folder. "We'll need to review all the details before reaching any conclusions. In the meantime, you'll remain here until further notice." Laura's stomach sank. "You're keeping me here for what? I haven't done anything wrong." "It's standard procedure," Grant said simply, standing up. "Someone will be in shortly to take your statement." With that, he left the room, leaving Laura alone once again. She slumped back in her chair, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. She was the victim here, not the perpetrator. Yet no one seemed willing to believe her. Hours dragged by. Laura lost track of time as she sat in the cold, empty room, her thoughts spiraling. She wondered if anyone had contacted her family yet, or if the officers planned to keep her locked up indefinitely. The injustice of it all burned inside her, fueling her anger and frustration. Eventually, the door opened, again, and Hicks stepped inside. He carried a clipboard and pen, setting them down on the table before sitting across from her. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold and distant. "We need your full statement," he said bluntly, sliding the clipboard toward her. "Write down everything that happened tonight." Laura hesitated, staring at the blank sheet of paper. She wanted to refuse, to demand answers or insist on being released, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. Instead, she picked up the pen and began writing, detailing every moment of the chaotic evening. She described the robbery, the chase, and the confrontation with Dawson and Hicks. She wrote quickly, her handwriting neat despite the trembling in her hands. When she finished, Hicks collected the clipboard without comment and left the room. Laura exhaled deeply, leaning back in her chair. At least she had told her side of the story. Now all she could do was wait. More time passed. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching endlessly. Laura's body ached from sitting in the same position for so long, and her throat felt dry. She hadn't been offered water or food since arriving at the station, and the neglect only added to her growing resentment. Finally, the door opened once more, and Lieutenant Grant reappeared, accompanied by another officer. This one was younger, with kinder eyes and a less intimidating presence. He introduced himself as Officer Bennett. "Captain Hayes," Bennett said gently, pulling out a chair. "We've reviewed your statement and we're working to verify the details. In the meantime, we'd like to release you, but we'll need you to sign some paperwork first." Laura blinked, surprised by the sudden change in tone. "You're letting me go?" "For now," Grant clarified, his voice firm. "But don't leave town. We may need to speak with you again as part of our investigation." Laura nodded, relief flooding through her. Anything was better than sitting in this cold, sterile room. As Bennett uncuffed her hands, she rubbed her sore wrists, wincing slightly. Her ankle still hurt. But she forced herself to stand, determined, to show strength despite everything. Bennett handed her a stack of papers and a pen. "Just sign at the bottom, please." Laura skimmed the documents quickly, her eyes scanning for anything suspicious. They appeared to be standard release forms, so she signed her name and handed them back. Bennett smiled faintly, offering her a bottle of water. "Thank you," Laura murmured, taking a grateful sip. The cool liquid soothed her parched throat, and she felt a small measure of comfort return. As they escorted her out of the station, Laura noticed the looks other officers gave her, some curious, others dismissive. She kept her head high, refusing to let their judgment affect her. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine trees. She took a deep breath, relishing the freedom after hours of confinement. A cab pulled up to the curb, arranged by Bennett at her request. As she climbed inside, she glanced back at the station one last time. The building loomed ominously against the dark sky, its windows glowing faintly in the distance. Laura knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Whatever happened next, she vowed to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone affected by prejudice and corruption, The cab drove away. Laura leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. Tonight had been a nightmare, but it was also a wake-up call. She realized now that the world wasn't always fair, and sometimes standing up for what was right came with a price. But she was ready to pay it. The cab ride home felt endless. Laura stared out the window, watching as the streets of Pine Ridge rolled by in a blur. The town looked different now, quieter, darker, almost like it was hiding secrets behind its closed doors and empty sidewalks. Her mind replayed the events of the night over and over again. The chase, the confrontation with Dawson and Hicks, the hours spent locked in that cold interrogation room. Each memory stung more than the last. When the cab finally pulled up to her childhood home, Laura paid the driver and stepped out onto the driveway. The house looked warm and inviting, its porch light glowing softly against the night. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to face her family. They would have questions, so many questions, and she wasn't sure she had the answers. Taking a deep breath, Laura walked up to the front door and opened it quietly. The living room was dimly lit, but she could hear voices coming from the kitchen. Her brother David sat at the table with their mother, sipping coffee and talking in hushed tones. When they saw her standing there, both of them froze. "Laura," her mother exclaimed, rushing over to hug her tightly. "Are you okay? What happened?" David stood up, his expression a mix of concern and anger. "We heard about what those officers did. Is it true? Did they really arrest you?" Laura nodded, sinking into a chair at the table. She felt exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her shoulders. "It's complicated," she began, her voice soft. "I was chasing a thief, and when I ran into those officers, they wouldn't let me continue. They accused me of interfering and resisting arrest." Her mother shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "This is unbelievable. You were trying to help, and they treated you like a criminal?" "I don't think it was just about that," Laura admitted, looking down at her hands. "There was something else, something personal. It felt like they didn't trust me because I'm a woman, or maybe because I'm in the military. I don't know." David clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "This isn't right. We can't let them get away with this. You need to report them, to file a complaint or something." "I already gave my statement at the station," Laura replied, rubbing her temples. "But I doubt it'll make much of a difference. Those men, they don't seem like they care about doing the right thing." Her mother placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, sweetheart. We'll figure it out together." For the first time, all night Laura felt a flicker of hope. Her family had always been her anchor, her support system. If anyone could help her navigate this mess, it was them. The next morning, Laura woke up early, her body still sore from the previous night's ordeal. She limped to the kitchen where her mother had prepared breakfast. David was already seated at the table, scrolling through his phone. "You should call Emily," he suggested, looking up at her. "She's good at organizing stuff. Maybe she can help spread the word about what happened." Laura frowned. "Spread the word? About what?" "About how those officers treated you," David explained. "People need to know. This isn't just your problem. It's a bigger issue. Corruption like that can't be ignored." Laura hesitated. She didn't want to cause trouble or draw attention to herself. But deep down, she knew David was right. If she stayed silent, nothing would change. And she couldn't live with that. After breakfast, she called Emily Carter, her childhood friend who now worked as a community organizer in Pine Ridge. Emily listened intently as Laura recounted the events of the night, her voice growing angrier with each detail. "This is unacceptable," Emily said firmly. "We can't let them get away with treating you like that. Let me talk to some people. I'll see what we can do." True to her word, Emily got to work immediately. By the end of the day, news of Laura's encounter with the officers had spread throughout Pine Ridge. Social media posts circulated, criticizing the police department for their actions. Locals began sharing stories of similar incidents, claiming that Dawson and Hicks had a history of misconduct. The backlash grew quickly. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Justice for Laura Hayes" and "Accountability Now." Emily organized rallies, speaking passionately about the need for reform within law enforcement. Her words resonated with the crowd, sparking conversations about bias and prejudice in the system. Meanwhile, Laura found herself at the center of it all. Reporters started calling her, asking for interviews and statements. At first, she declined, unsure if she wanted to go public with her story. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she had a responsibility to speak up, not just for herself, but for others who might face the same injustice. She agreed to an interview with a local journalist, sitting nervously in her living room as cameras rolled. "I didn't expect any of this to happen," she said honestly. "All I wanted was to stop a criminal and protect someone who needed help. Instead, I was treated like the enemy. That's not fair, and it's not right." Her words struck a chord with viewers. People praised her courage and resilience, calling for accountability and transparency from the police department. Even national news outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on Pine Ridge and its troubled relationship with law enforcement. Despite the growing support, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from resolved. Dawson and Hicks remained defiant, denying any wrongdoing and insisting they had acted appropriately. Their attorney argued that Laura's actions during the chase constituted interference and claimed that firing a weapon was justified under the circumstances. Lieutenant Grant, meanwhile, seemed caught in the middle. He issued a brief statement promising a thorough investigation but avoided taking sides. His lack of action frustrated Laura, who felt the department was dragging its feet to protect its own. As days turned into weeks, the tension in Pine Ridge reached a boiling point. Protests continued, drawing larger crowds and louder demands for justice. Some residents called for Dawson and Hicks to be fired, while others defended the officers, accusing Laura of exaggerating the situation. Through it all, Laura stayed focused. She met with lawyers, civil rights organizations, and community leaders, determined to hold the officers accountable. With their guidance, she filed a formal complaint against Dawson and Hicks, citing excessive use of force and racial and gender bias. The case gained national attention, pitting supporters of law enforcement against advocates for reform. At the same time, Laura struggled with the emotional toll of the ordeal. The shooting had left her with more than just a physical injury. It had shaken her faith in fairness and justice. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she often found herself staring at the ceiling, wondering if anything would ever truly change. Her family noticed her distress and did their best to support her. David accompanied her to meetings with lawyers, offering encouragement and advice. Her mother cooked her favorite meals and reminded her to take breaks, urging her not to let the stress consume her. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, David broke the silence. "You know, none of this is your fault," he said gently. "You didn't ask for any of this to happen, but you're handling it with so much strength and grace. I'm proud of you." Laura smiled faintly, appreciating his words. "I just wish it didn't have to be this hard. Fighting for justice shouldn't feel like a battle." "It is a battle," David replied. "But you're not fighting alone. Look at everyone rallying around you, the protests, the petitions, the calls for reform. You've sparked something important, Laura, something that can't be ignored." His words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of optimism. Change was slow and difficult, but it was possible, and she was determined to be part of it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Laura. Every day brought new developments in her case, as well as fresh challenges. The formal complaint she filed against officers Dawson and Hicks had set off a chain reaction within the police department and the community. Internal investigations were launched, but progress was slow, bogged down by red tape and resistance from higher-ups who seemed reluctant to address the issue head-on. Laura spent most of her days meeting with lawyers, civil rights advocates, and journalists. Each conversation felt like another step toward justice, but it also reminded her how entrenched the problems were. Corruption wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. It ran deep, hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and denial. Still, she refused to give up. If anything, the obstacles only fueled her determination. One afternoon, Laura met with Emily Carter at a small cafe downtown. Emily had been instrumental in organizing protests and raising awareness about Laura's case. She arrived carrying a stack of papers, her face flushed from rushing through the chilly autumn air. "I've got some updates," Emily said, sliding into the seat across from Laura. "First, the petition we started has over 10,000 signatures now. People are really fired up about this." Laura nodded, though her expression remained cautious. "That's good, but petitions alone won't change anything. What about the investigation? Emily sighed, flipping through her notes. It's moving slowly. Lieutenant Grant claims they're reviewing all the evidence, but there's no clear timeline. Some people think they're stalling because they don't want bad press. That doesn't surprise me, Laura muttered, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their own. But here's the thing, Emily continued, leaning forward. Public pressure is working. National news outlets are covering your story, and politicians are starting to take notice. A few state representatives have reached out. They want to meet with you. Laura raised an eyebrow, surprised. Politicians? Why? They see this as an opportunity to push for reform, Emily explained. Your case highlights bigger issues, bias in law enforcement, lack of accountability, systemic problems that need fixing. They're using your story to advocate for changes in policy. For a moment, Laura sat in silence, letting the weight of Emily's words sink in. On one hand, she was grateful that her experience might lead to meaningful change. On the other hand, being thrust into the spotlight made her uncomfortable. She hadn't asked for any of this, she'd simply tried to do the right thing. What should I do? Laura asked quietly. I don't want to make things worse. You're not making things worse, Emily assured her. You're shining a light on something that's been ignored for too long. Just tell your truth, that's all anyone can ask of you. Laura nodded slowly, still unsure. But deep down, she knew Emily was right. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone affected by prejudice and injustice. Later that week, Laura attended a town hall meeting organized by local leaders and activists. The event was held in Pine Ridge's community center, a large open space filled with rows of folding chairs. By the time Laura arrived, the room was packed with residents eager to voice their opinions. As she took her seat near the front, Laura noticed familiar faces in the crowd. Neighbors, friends, even former classmates. Many of them smiled or waved, offering silent support. Others wore expressions of anger and frustration, holding signs that read, "Justice for Laura" and "Reform." Now, the meeting began with speeches from community leaders, each one emphasizing the need for transparency and accountability. Then came the public comment portion, where residents were invited to share their thoughts. One by one, people stood up, recounting their own experiences with bias and misconduct in the police department. An elderly woman spoke about being stopped repeatedly while walking her dog, simply because she lived in a predominantly black neighborhood. A young man described being pulled over for no reason and searched without consent. Another woman tearfully recounted how her son had been arrested for a crime he didn't commit, leaving him with a record that haunted him for years. Each story added another layer to the growing call for reform. Laura listened intently, her heart heavy with the realization that her experience was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. These weren't isolated incidents, they were symptoms of a broken system. When it was her turn to speak, Laura hesitated. Standing in front of so many people felt intimidating, especially knowing that every word she said would be scrutinized, but she reminded herself why she was there, to stand up for what was right, no matter how hard it might be. Thank you for having me here tonight, she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. I never imagined I'd find myself in this position, fighting for justice after being treated unfairly by the very people who are supposed to protect us. She paused, glancing around the room. What happened to me wasn't an accident. It was the result of bias. Bias based on gender, profession, maybe even race. Those officers didn't see me as someone trying to help. They saw me as a threat because I wasn't one of them. Her words resonated with the crowd, earning murmurs of agreement. Encouraged, Laura continued. But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. We deserve better than a system that allows prejudice and corruption to go unchecked. We deserve officers who serve and protect everyone equally, not just those they deem worthy. Applause erupted when she finished speaking, filling the room with energy and hope. For the first time in weeks, Laura felt a sense of purpose, a belief that change was possible if enough people came together to demand it. In the days that followed, momentum continued to build. State representatives scheduled meetings with Laura and other community leaders to discuss potential reforms. Local schools hosted discussions about racial and gender bias, encouraging students to think critically about fairness and equality. Even the police department announced plans to implement new training programs aimed at addressing these issues, though many residents remained skeptical of their sincerity. Despite the progress, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. Dawson and Hicks still walked free, their fates uncertain as internal investigations dragged on. Public outrage showed no signs of fading, and tensions between protesters and law enforcement remained high. One evening, as Laura sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, David joined her, handing her a cup of tea. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. "I'm okay," she replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just exhausting. Every victory feels like 2 steps forward and 1 step back." David nodded, understanding completely. "Change takes time, Laura, but look at everything you've accomplished already. You've inspired people to speak out, to demand better. That's huge." Laura smiled faintly, appreciating his optimism. "I guess I just wish it didn't feel like such a battle sometimes." "It is a battle," David said firmly. "But you're winning. Maybe not every fight, but you're making a difference, and that matters." His words stayed with her long after he went inside. As darkness fell over Pine Ridge, Laura gazed at the stars, finding comfort in their constancy. No matter how chaotic life became, some things remained steady, and she vowed to be one of them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage and resilience, determined to leave the world a little better than she found it. Months passed, and the legal proceedings against Officers Dawson and Hicks finally reached their conclusion. The trial had been long and emotionally draining for everyone involved, especially Laura. Each day in court brought new challenges, testimonies that contradicted her account, lawyers who tried to twist her words, and moments when she felt like giving up altogether. But through it all, she remained steadfast, determined to see justice served. The courtroom was packed on the final day of the trial. Supporters filled the benches behind Laura, including her family, Emily Carter, and members of the community, who had rallied around her cause. On the other side of the room sat Dawson and Hicks, their expressions unreadable as they listened to closing arguments from both sides. The prosecution argued that Dawson and Hicks had acted out of bias and prejudice, ignoring protocol and using excessive force without justification. They presented evidence gathered during the investigation, including witness statements from the woman whose purse had been stolen and bystanders who saw the officer's behavior firsthand. They also highlighted the broader context of systemic issues within law enforcement, framing the case as a pivotal moment for accountability and reform. The defense, however, painted a different picture. Dawson and Hicks's attorney claimed that Laura's actions during the chase constituted interference with official duties, and insisted that firing a weapon was necessary due to perceived threats. He portrayed his clients as victims of public pressure and media sensationalism, arguing that they were simply doing their jobs under difficult circumstances. When the judge delivered the verdict, the room fell silent. Laura held her breath, gripping the edge of her seat as the words echoed through the courtroom. "Officer Ryan Hicks is found guilty of discharging his firearm without sufficient cause," the judge announced. "He will serve 6 months of probation and undergo mandatory bias training. Officer Carl Dawson is acquitted of all charges." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some cheered quietly at Hicks's conviction, while others expressed disappointment over Dawson's acquittal. For Laura, the verdict felt bittersweet. It wasn't the full justice she had hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. Sign that change, however slow, was possible. As reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, Laura stood alongside her lawyer and addressed the cameras. "This case has shown us that there are cracks in the system," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "But it's also shown us that we can come together to demand better. We won't stop fighting until real change happens, not just here in Pine Ridge, but everywhere." Her words resonated with the crowd, earning applause and nods of agreement. Inside, she felt a mix of relief and frustration. While the trial was over, the larger battle for justice and equality was far from finished. Back in Pine Ridge, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The protests continued, though they became smaller and more focused. Community leaders worked closely with local officials to implement reforms within the police department, including updated training programs and stricter oversight measures. Public forums were held regularly, giving residents a platform to voice concerns and hold authorities accountable. Laura returned to Fort Liberty, resuming her duties as an Army officer. Though her leg still ached occasionally, she refused to let it slow her down. Her experience in Pine Ridge had changed her perspective on leadership and responsibility. She realized now that serving and protecting went beyond following orders. It meant standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. One afternoon, Laura stood before a group of cadets at Fort Liberty, sharing her story as part of a leadership seminar. The young men and women listened intently, their eyes wide with curiosity and admiration. "When I chased that thief," Laura began, pacing slowly in front of them, "I thought I was doing my duty. What I didn't expect was how much resistance I'd face, not from the criminal but from people who should have been on my side. Bias and prejudice exist everywhere, even in places where they shouldn't. And sometimes, standing up for justice means challenging those systems." She paused, meeting each cadet's gaze. "You wear these uniforms to serve and protect, but remember, trust is earned, not given. If you want to make a difference, you have to earn the respect of the people you're sworn to protect. That starts with listening, understanding, and being willing to change." The room erupted in applause when she finished speaking. As Laura stepped away from the podium, she felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in months. Sharing her story wasn't easy, but it reminded her why she had fought so hard, to inspire others to do better. In Pine Ridge, the impact of Laura's case continued to ripple outward. The police department implemented its promised reforms, though progress was gradual. Officers attended mandatory bias training sessions, and independent oversight committees were established to review complaints. Residents noticed subtle changes: a shift in tone during interactions with law enforcement, a greater willingness to listen, and a renewed focus on building trust within the community. Emily Carter remained active in her advocacy work, organizing workshops and discussions about racial and gender bias. She often invited Laura to speak at events, and the two women developed a strong friendship rooted in their shared commitment to justice. For Laura, returning home to Pine Ridge felt different now. The town she had grown up in no longer seemed foreign or hostile. Instead, it felt like a place of growth and resilience, a community learning to heal and evolve together. Even the streets where she had chased the thief now carried a sense of hope, reminders that even in the darkest moments, light could break through. One evening, as Laura walked along the familiar sidewalks of her hometown, she reflected on everything that had happened. The shooting, the trial, the protests, they had all left scars, both visible and invisible. But they had also taught her valuable lessons about courage, perseverance, and the power of collective action. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from David. "Proud of you, sis. You've made a difference." Laura smiled softly, typing a quick reply. "We've made a difference." As she slipped the phone back into her pocket, she looked up at the sky, painted orange and pink by the setting sun. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she knew she wasn't alone. Together, she and countless others would continue pushing for a fairer, kinder world, one step at a time. And as she limped forward, her stride steady and purposeful, Laura Hayes knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.